Well, if you were here for week 3 of this series, you know that you and I might not see eye to eye on childhood classics like Legos. Freak. But while we might not agree on everything childhood related, I bet we can both agree that the Cars movie franchise is awesome. Lightning McQueen, Vader, Love is a Highway. Give me any of those movies any day of the week. And if you saw Cars 3, you'll remember that it was all about Lightning McQueen's difficult journey to reinvent himself. Essentially, the movie explores how McQueen had to throw away the old ways of racing and embrace the new ways if he was going to have any shot at competing in this new, technologically driven world of racing. He had to learn new training techniques, take on a new appearance, embrace new strategies. In order to thrive in the new, he had to throw off the old. That should sound real familiar to those of you who have been with us throughout the series. Because, like Lightning McQueen, there are a lot of us in the room who have trouble throwing off the old and embracing the new. Specifically, many of us have a lot of trouble shaking off old covenant thinking and embracing new covenant thinking, and that's problematic. Because the gray of the old and the way of the new don't mix well. Yucky! When you mix a little of the gray with a little of the way, you wind up hurting people. When you combine a pinch of the old with a pinch of the new, you wind up hurting yourself. And when you act as if the way God used to operate is the way that God operates now, you wind up hurting your relationship with God. And while there are so many examples of how old covenant thinking affects the way that we live, I just want to talk through 3 examples today. So we're going to be skipping around a little bit in the New Testament, so I have to ask that you stay with me. First, we're headed to 1 John 4:18. The Apostle John is writing to Christians in order to make it crystal clear what it means to follow the way. And here's what he writes. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced his perfect love. A lot of us do the right thing out of fear. We're kind to others because we're afraid that God will punish us if we're not. That's old covenant thinking. In the old covenant, God punished his people for their bad behavior. And so the motivating factor for the Jewish people was fear of God, but that's not the way that God works in the new covenant. If you've placed your trust in Jesus, and your motivation for being kind and loving and generous shouldn't be fear of God. John explains what motivates us in the new covenant in verse 19. We love each other because he loved us first. It's not about punishment. It's about passing on what you've experienced from God through Christ. We don't love others because God is going to be mad if we don't. We love others because Jesus freed us up to love others when he loved us first. When you see through the lens of the old covenant, you'll be motivated through fear, but a new covenant lens motivates through freedom. Here's another example of old covenant thinking. When was the last time you asked the question, is blank a sin? And listen, I can list out a bunch of things that might fill in that blank, right? All of those little secret little things that you do that you don't really want your parents or your church friends or your pastor or whoever to know. But I'm not trying to put you on blast right now. You know what belongs in that blank when you're thinking, is blank a sin? When we ask those questions, our concern is trying to get as close to breaking the rules as we can without breaking the rules. Right, here's what the Apostle Paul had to say about that kind of thinking in Ephesians 4:22-24. He says, the way is to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires. Paul calls the person you used to be before Jesus your old self. So those desires to do the wrong thing, that's your old self. Since the gray was all about following the rules, old covenant thinking means that it's totally fine to be your old self and want to do the wrong thing as long as you don't technically break any rules. Like when your mom tells your little sister to stop touching you, so instead she goes, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. But Paul makes it crystal clear that this is not the way. The way isn't just not doing the bad things you really want to do, it's about putting off your old self altogether. He continues to explain what he means in verse 23. And to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. So the way is about putting on your new self, taking on a new identity entirely. And this new self, this new you is created after the likeness of God. This new you is created to look more and more like God. That's your goal now. That's the desire of your new self. So whereas old covenant thinking is about avoiding doing the bad things you really want to do, new covenant thinking is about looking more and more like Jesus. When you're seeing through the lens of the gray, you ask questions like, how close can I get to sinning without sinning? But when you're seeing through the lens of the way, you ask questions like, how close can I get to becoming like Jesus? All right, I know this is a lot, but let me give you one more example of the difference between old covenant thinking and new covenant thinking. When you see through the lens of the old covenant, it's really easy to have thoughts like, I'm better than those people because those people do blah, 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 blah. Right? When your faith is all about following the rules, it's really easy to look down on lesser Christians because you're better than them. That's old covenant thinking. In the old covenant, you could condemn people for their sin, right? Some sins were punishable by death. Other sins had less severe punishments. So it was easy to feel superior to other people as long as the sins you've committed were less severe than the sins they've committed. But that was the gray. And this, as Paul shows us in Ephesians 2:2-4, this is the way. You used to live in sin, just like the rest of the world, obeying the devil, the commander of the powers in the unseen world. He is the spirit at work in the hearts of those who refuse to obey God. All of us used to live that way, following the passionate desires and inclinations of our sinful nature. By our very nature, we were subject to God's anger just like everyone else. But God is so rich in mercy, and he loved us so much. So the new covenant is about all of us having sinned and fallen short of God's standard. But God was merciful toward us. He loved us. He sent his son Jesus to show us a new way to live and to die for us. Like get this, God, who is actually morally superior to you and me, decided that his response to us would be grace and mercy and love and sacrifice. So who are we to act superior toward others? God is far more superior to us than we are to anybody else. And his attitude toward us is one of mercy and love in the context of the new covenant. And when you see through the lens of the new covenant, that's exactly what your attitude will be toward others. So an old covenant lens values superiority, but a new covenant lens values sacrificial love. So here's the deal. I know it's difficult. I know that it's counterintuitive. I know that this disrupts the way you previously thought about religion. You're not the first to feel like that, right? Like the very reason we have most of the New Testament is because the early Christians struggled with this so much that the apostles had to write letters to nudge them in the right direction. But I'm telling you, it's worth making the shift from old covenant thinking to new covenant thinking, because the new covenant thinking will change you. It'll make you way different than you were before. Or you used to be a person who weighed rule following more heavily than genuine kindness. You used to be a person who weighed sin avoidance more heavily than Christ-likeness. You used to be a person who weighed superiority more heavily than grace and humility. Those things used to be worth more to you, but that was before you were a follower of the way. Here's the point. The way will make you way different because you'll weigh things different. Sometimes it really feels like Christianity is complicated, but in all honesty, it's not. Jesus came to uncomplicate religion. He came to get rid of something old and bring something new, something better, something simple. And as you move forward, I hope you'll choose to spend more time thinking about what God has done for you in the gospel. Sit in it, journal about it, read about it, talk about it. Because your one commandment in the context of the new covenant is to do for others what has been done for you in the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the way.